Well, good morning. My name is Chad Vandaloon, and we are continuing with our week 2 of the Advent series. The theme today is making room for the uncomfortable. So I thought Mike did a great job, and I thought, how uncomfortable would it be to just say what he said, mic drop, walk out? Okay, too uncomfortable. So we won't do that. So last week, Tom talked about making room for the unexpected. And this week, we're going to really focus on Joseph's story. But before we get going, Tom mentioned last week that he was doing Christmas decorating. I'm guessing a lot of you were in the same boat this week. And here's my experience with Christmas decorating. My job is tree management at our house. I get the tree set up, I get the lights, I do all of that. And anybody have one of those pre-lit trees? And if you've had it for a while, what happens? The pre-lit becomes no lit. And I'm cutting, and I'm cutting, and I'm pulling the junk off, and I'm cutting, and finally I have a no pre-lit tree. But that means I have to relight the thing. And how long do your lights last that you buy at Walmart? Maybe 2 years, maybe 3. And so you get everything out of the box, you plug it in, oh, that doesn't work, trash, that doesn't work, trash. And I'm sitting there going, honey, I am done. I am out. I am the Scrooge bah humbug. I don't want to look at this thing. I came back to it after some reflection and said, I think I'm going to rally here. But this was the uncomfortable I was experiencing last weekend, although not the exact same about what we're going to talk about today. Has anybody ever seen the movie Polar Express? Anybody seen that? Yep, a couple of you, or read the book. Great story, wonderful story. And I remember the little boy. Remember the little boy, the last one they pick up? He's on the other side of the tracks. And what is the line that he has when he's in the caboose and after his friends bring him the hot chocolate? What does he say? It's like, Christmas just doesn't quite work out for me. And so I want to push into that with us today. And Mike really set us up well. There's all these expectations, all this anticipation. If we can go to the second slide. This is the perfect Christmas, right? For years and years, we're all striving for this event that we've all always longed for. And we're going to have the perfect family gathering, and we're going to have the perfect meal. And it's a big buildup. But sometimes it just doesn't quite work out, does it? The unexpected happens. The uncomfortable happens. And so as I'm pondering this, and I'm thinking back to our series about kingdom culture, and how do we be real in the midst of the Advent season? It feels like our society and our culture builds all this up. Is that real? Is that how it really goes in our lives? Is that what we're really supposed to be experiencing? Is that transformational? To Mike's point, it feels like we build up all these walls so that when Christmas finally comes, we really don't know how to wait well, how to engage, how to really process the Christmas story. And that gets difficult. How do we understand what transformation is in the light of the Advent season? These pictures make us feel like if we can't have that, we're not enough. We don't have what it takes. I didn't plan the right thing. I didn't buy the right gift. The marketing is the same every year. It comes at us earlier and earlier, though, doesn't it? And we build up these walls. And for some of us, if we're honest with ourselves, even the Christmas story itself, after you've heard it for 30 plus years, 20 plus years, you go, man, it loses a little bit of its luster and wonder, doesn't it? Because you've heard it so many times. So how is it that we find the real of Advent? How can we continue to be transformed by something that is so familiar that we take it for granted? So that's our goal this morning. How do we break through? How do we change our paradigms as we read this familiar story? So this is the one thing. Without change in our lives, transformation is impossible. And that's part of the story of Christmas. God introduces major, amazing, incredible change that nobody is expecting. And it gets really uncomfortable. We're going to take a look at our scripture passage, and it's Matthew 1, verse 18 to 25. So if you don't have a Bible, I'd recommend that you find one. I want you to look at this, and I want you to read with me with a different perspective. I want you to almost think as if you were a journalist. Some of us would like to be a journalist in today's media and write the story, the headline, wouldn't we? What kind of journalist are you going to be? We're going to take this in small bits, couple of verses at a time. You're going to be the truth journalist that really just tells the facts. You're going to include a little drama, spice it up. So I might ask a couple of you for what your headline is. So let's go ahead and start reading at verse 18 of Matthew 1. It says, "This is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together, she was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly." So let's stop right there. That's a lot of information in just 2 verses, isn't it? What did you see? What did you read? What, from a different perspective, the journalist's mind, what would your headline be after reading those 2 verses? Anybody want to shout it out? Scandal. Perfect. It's absolutely scandalous. Anybody else? National Enquirer stuff. Exactly right. So, perfect. I love that one. Here's what I came up with. Let's see. Local upstanding carpenter planning to quietly break off engagement with fiancé who claims she's pregnant by Holy Spirit. That is Enquirer stuff, isn't it? Can you imagine what was going on in those people's lives, in Mary and Joseph, their families? There's honor at stake here. They've made contracts, commitments to each other as families. Their futures are at stake in how they handle this. Their finances are at stake. There's been a dowry paid. So it's not just like today's culture where it's pretty easy to break off an engagement. I mean, they are well down the path, and their lives are nearly intertwined as families, as individuals. Can you imagine what the talk around the drawing well was in Nazareth? What does that sound like? It wasn't that big. Everybody had to know about Mary and Joseph's story and their family. They had to be consumed by what was going on. And everybody's talking about it. We know that from Luke's account, Mary went to spend time with Elizabeth. So she kind of gets out of the public eye, but Joseph is still there. Can you imagine all the sleepless nights he has trying to figure out what in the world am I going to do? I'm sure his dad was talking to him going, oh boy, we are in the soup now. How are we going to maintain your honor, quietly take care of this, and escape with as little damage as possible? But he also has to think about Mary. And in the culture and the time that they live, by law, he could have her stoned. So Mary's life is at stake. Her baby's life is at stake. There's a lot on the line in how they choose to handle this. It gets pretty crazy. All right, let's go to verse 20. So we're talking about Joseph, picking it back up there again. He says, "But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, 'Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid. Take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Let's stop the tape again there. 2 more verses. I wonder what the headline is. You're the journalist. What's the story? What's that about? Sounds like he's having second thoughts to me. My National Enquirer headline was, Carpenter reconsiders after dream with instructions from angel. Shotgun wedding this weekend, baby to be named Jesus. If I'm hearing this story in that time, I'm going, oh, he really did do it. He's passing the blame off on somebody else, but he's decided that if he's going to have any honor, he's going to protect Mary's life, the baby's, he's going to go ahead and take her as his wife. What do you think was going on in Joseph's heart? Obviously, he believed the angel because he followed the instructions. Do you think he trusted his soon-to-be wife? What do you think the conversations were like between the two of them? She's with her cousin Elizabeth, but I bet they're writing letters possibly. Or carrier pigeons, or whatever they use to communicate. What do you think those letters were like? What kind of questions do you think they were asking each other? Man, there had to be some veiled stuff going on to say, man, do I really trust? Do I really believe that you're for me? And they're having to wait till they can get back together to really understand, what was your real intention? What was my intention? Let's go ahead and finish out the rest of the passage. So all of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son and gave him the name Jesus. Not too much the National Enquirer is really interested in that. We've got to read the rest of the story. You've got to figure out what's going on in the New Testament to pick it up. But the question becomes for us as we step back, how do we make sense of why in the world God would bring his son to earth in this way? You ever wonder? You ever really think about what's going on and you go, man, God could do it any way he wanted to. It could be full of fanfare and pageantry. He's the king of the world. But he chooses to do it like this? What a mess. It's certainly not the royal family baby announcement you've heard with Kate and William, is it? Man, that's a big deal when they're having a baby. All the best schools, all the best places. No, this story is filled with scandal. It's filled with shame. It's filled with sexual misconduct, financial loss, loss of social position. It's filled with signs, wonders, angels, stuff that's uncomfortable, stuff that makes us kind of squirm in our chair and go, wow, I'm glad that's not me. Or is it? Is that what's in our story? Doesn't that sound familiar? Have any of us experienced any of these situations in our lives, even a little bit? See, I think God's plan was to make it as tough as possible for Jesus entering the world. How else could he identify with what we're going through and the mess that we get ourselves in? He had to do that. Can you go ahead and hit slide 3, please? God was in the middle of introducing major change and transformation. The culture that Jesus was born into You've got the Romans and the Jews duking it out for power. Sound familiar to our culture today? Are there people duking it out for power? Nationally, internationally. The community, the religious establishment was a mess in Jesus' time. Absolute disaster. Infighting, bickering. It's all going on. Their community of Nazareth. It's an upstart, backwater little place. Kind of the armpit of Jesus' time. But it's experiencing some kind of economic rebirth, and there's tons of people showing up. Like carpenters. I don't know what the carpenter MO is back in Jesus' day, but that's kind of a transient profession, right? You go where the jobs are. When the oil fields are booming, you go up to the oil fields to build houses for people. Right? You follow where the work is. What kind of people was that attracting? What about Jesus' family? He's from the line of David. Wow. That's certainly an interesting lineage, isn't it? If we go back to Matthew 1, the first part of Matthew 1 covers all of it. Look at everything. Look at all the fabulous characters in Jesus' line. Abraham. He had to lie to Pharaoh about his wife because he was afraid. He takes his wife's maidservant to actually have a son, doesn't believe what God's saying. Yeah, you come down here and you have Ruth and Boaz. Boaz's mother is Rahab, the prostitute. David, Solomon. And then the mess of kings that go up to the exile of Judah. And you go through all of this and you say, wow. Jesus' family line is full of misfits, scandal, problems, lies, murder. Kind of makes, well, I don't know exactly what my family line is, but I don't think it looks that bad. Right? We can look at that and say, man, I'm not quite as bad as what Jesus' family line was. But this is what he's born into. This is the mess that he has to deal with. Look at that very last verse there in chapter 1. It says there were 14 generations in all, from Abraham to David. From David to the exile, there were 14. And from the exile to Jesus coming, there were 14 as well. So 42 generations overall, from Abraham to when Jesus comes. And Keith was sharing with me this morning that the number 14 means deliverance and redemption. And that's the setting that God brings Jesus and his birth into in our lives. All of that mess. And Isaiah 53 verse 3 reminds us and says, Jesus was despised. He was rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. By our standards today, Mary and Joseph and Jesus' lives couldn't have gotten off to any more difficult of a start as a married couple. They had an almost vertical hill to climb. Uncomfortable, unexpected, none of their own doing. And God plops them right in the middle of the soup and the mess. That's God. He's doing the unexpected. He's doing the uncomfortable, and he wants to shake things up. So a little personal story. About September, I was on the road traveling for work, and it was a tough period of time from August through, I think it was the end of October or middle of November. I was gone for like 7 or 8 weeks. And a couple of weeks in there were back to back. And it wasn't fun. And if any of you travel regularly, it's hard to be away from your family. It's hard to be away from your support structure. And maintain your discipline. Keep focus. Still have your quiet time. Oh, the company's paying, I'll eat a little extra tonight. right? Keeping your feet on the narrow path is tough. Well, I'm coming back from a run one afternoon or one morning, and I'm getting close to the hotel, and as I'm on my cool down, I'm running down the sidewalk, and I just glance off over to the right, and under these bushes, I find an Uno card with the number 8 on it. So if you've heard Keith talking about numerology and what do numbers mean, at first I just passed by it. I'm like, geez, another piece of trash on the road. Nobody's, cleaning up around here on the hotel property. I will tell you, I looked around the rest of that property, and this was the only piece of trash I could find. Apparently it wasn't trash. It was for me. And so the number 8 means a circumcision of the heart, new beginnings. So when I read that, I kind of put it down and was like, I don't need any circumcision, thank you very much. I'm done. We'll just let that one sit for a little while. That was certainly unexpected. It was uncomfortable to think about. And so time moves, and Tom asked me to be a part of the Advent team. And 2 weeks ago, so it had been the week before Thanksgiving, I had a dream. And, I'm waiting, I'm processing these things. And it was 4:30 in the morning, and I hadn't gotten a full 8 hours of sleep, which is usually when I dream best, and all of that comes back. But it was so crystal clear. And I don't know if you remember the last time that I was up and I spoke with you, that Shay had a dream and challenged me and asked me a very direct question. She's like, are you having an affair? And just so you know, if you weren't here then, no, I'm not having an affair. But it was a tough question. It was an uncomfortable conversation that we needed to have as a husband and wife. Well, 2 weeks ago, I have a dream, and at 4:30, my brother's asking me a question in this dream. And he's saying, are you in any relationships that you shouldn't be, essentially? And immediately, I go to my sock drawer. Because in my spirit, there's something I'm hiding in my sock drawer. I don't know what it is. So when I wake up, I literally go to my sock drawer. I'm like, and as Shay will tell you, I have a problem with putting all of my socks in the laundry right away. So she's probably saying, well, yeah, you need to wash those things. They're just disgusting. I'm like, hey, I wore it for work for 8 hours. Reuse it. It's a guy thing, right? Carry over from college. I'm wearing clean socks today. And so immediately, I'm taken back to the dream that she had. And there's some tough and uncomfortable conversations. Also in my sock drawer are some credit cards that I know I don't use because I'm going, I just got to keep those off on the side in case I need them somewhere for an emergency or something like that. So there's some things in my life that are difficult, that are uncomfortable. And I'd been waiting to figure out, what does this mean? 2-3 months. I just didn't understand it. I didn't know what God had in that. And I just put it away. And I realized that God's trying to say, hey, you need to push into these things. I'm giving you a sign. I'm giving you something in your life that you need to pay attention to. It is uncomfortable. Circumcision, thank goodness I don't remember it. But the things in our life that need to be cut away, the things in our life that need to be dealt with and removed, whether it's in my relationship, my primary relationships, or it's for all of us, we got to deal with that stuff. Can you have the next slide, please? Wait for it. So this is James 1, verses 2 through 5. It says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And if you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. I needed wisdom. God, what does this mean for my life? Is this for me? Is it for others? How do I share that? We need wisdom as we process through that. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about how do we bring real and transformation into the Advent season? And how do we look at that in the context of our culture and our community? And how do we make sense of it? See, God's ways aren't our ways. And if you think culturally about what's going on right now, anybody heard of Matt Lauer? Yep. There's a narrative that's all of a sudden been opened up in a dialogue in our country that frankly I didn't think we would ever see. God's willing to use the ungodly in our lives, the life of our country and the journey we're on, to create a dialogue and a conversation. I was sitting at work, and a guy who I guess I found out really has no spiritual or faith life starts talking to me about this. And now I have a chance to share Jesus and what hope there is, even in the midst of all of this shame of what's going on. What about in our community? What about our traditions? Where do we need to make room for mercy? Anybody read the gratitude journal that came out over Thanksgiving? Did you read some of those stories that are happening in our community and how God is healing pain and coming through for people that are facing difficult situations? How about our families? Man, this is the tough time of year if there's brokenness in your family. How do you have honor in the middle of that for people? How do you make room for those uncomfortable scenarios and situations and still show honor when it doesn't feel like you want to be nice at all? And then for ourselves, how do we process? How do we have hope in the uncomfortable, the stuff we're finding in our lives? Isn't this why Jesus came? Isn't this exactly why he showed up? Isn't this why he came the way he did? To give us hope. Our lives are like Matt Lauer's. There's stuff that if it was published in the media day after day after day, I'd be ashamed. You'd be ashamed. We'd be embarrassed. But thank goodness Jesus came to give hope in the middle of the unexpected, in the middle of the uncomfortable. Because that's all of our stories. Not a single one of us has the Norman Rockwell Christmas. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work out that way. But thank goodness for Jesus. Thank goodness for the gift. So my question to us is, in the waiting, in the anticipation, where are we noticing that God is introducing change in our lives? Whether it's uncomfortable, whether it's difficult, whether it's unexpected. How do we push into those? I'll ask the worship team to come up as we go to the last slide and talk about the action steps. I thought these were great that Tom had, this contemplation time and this relationship time, and I'm gonna stick with that theme this week. So as you contemplate and have your time of reflection, how can God use the unexpected or uncomfortable in your situation to bring transformation to your family, to your community, maybe to the culture and the kingdom? Social media. We have a platform like we have never had before as Christians to share and be transparent. How can we be real this Advent season and peel that falseness away? Have you been avoiding certain relationships due to the discomfort that they bring? Maybe this is a time to push into that and have a conversation. Are you too comfortable? Are you sitting out there going, man, Chad, I don't really know what you're talking about. I'm not identifying. Maybe that means you're too comfortable. do something that's going to get you and put you out there into the discomfort and uncomfortableness of life? What about in your relationship time? Is there something in your primary relationships that you haven't been honest with somebody about that you need to be? There's going to be prayer. There's going to be communion after the service. Start the journey today of exposing that and talking about the uncomfortable subjects and issues in our lives that will bring healing. And when we bring that to the light of Jesus, transformation happens. Not just in us, but in our families, our communities, and our kingdom, our culture around us.